Hello, this is Taylor Ellwood, and welcome to tonight's Magical Experiments live stream, where we're going to be talking about how practical space-time magic works. And I'm going to be sharing with you what it looks like and how you can apply it to your life. I do have a little bit of a cold that I'm recovering from, so my apologies for that. If my voice sounds a little less clear than I would like, that's why. First things first, of course, I'm gonna mention the books that I've written on this topic because, you may find them useful. Um, Space-Time Magic Foundations, Space-Time Magic, A Guide to Practical Probability Magic, and Magical Identity, which explores somewhat the same topic. I am actually in the early process of researching another book on space-time magic, so that's probably going to be a few years down the line, quite frankly. I've got a number of other writing projects I'm working on, but I just want to put that out there. So, a lot of people, when they think about space-time magic, think about it in relationship to retroactive magic. What can I do to affect my past? But that's not the only thing space-time magic is for. I think of space-time magic as as probability magic, as magic that's involved with aligning the elements of space and time in your favor in order to achieve specific results. It involves manipulating space and time in order to achieve specific results, and some of it works with linear space and time, and some of it works with nonlinear space and time. And when we look at practical magic techniques around space-time magic, what we find is that, we have practical magic techniques that are more oriented around altering conscious awareness of space and time, usually through meditation or through a state of flow or something else along those lines. But then we also have the practical aspects or the very practical manipulation of space and time through your average use of sorcery, but combining elements of space and time with that average use of sorcery. Think, sigils, for example. So that's kind of a broad range. And when I talk about the manipulation of space and time, what I'm really talking about is our manipulation is the manipulation of our understanding of space and time. We have a very linear perspective of space and time in our everyday lives. You get up in the morning, you brush your teeth, you go drive to work, you work, and then you have your first break, and then you have, work some more, and then lunch, et cetera, et cetera. Very sequential blocks of time, right? Things are moving along this way and that. And that's the experience that most of us have with time. But of course, there are alternative experiences with time as well. There are nonlinear experiences of time. I mean, one that I would use as an example is my experience of what I consider to be timelines, where one of the things that I can do is kind of sense a given timeline and work with it and manipulate it and maybe even mesh it with another timeline in order to accomplish a specific realization of a result. That's more nonlinear. Or a combination of linear and nonlinear, where you take the linear sequence of time and you rearrange it using a nonlinear awareness. Now, all that sounds great and novel, but then the question comes like, well, how do you actually do that, Taylor? How does that work? And so a classic example, and by classic, I mean really it's an example I shared in Space-Time Magic way back when I wrote it, is the comic book sigil method. In the comic book sigil method, you have multiple sigils that you're using, and what you're doing is you're setting it up where each sigil represents a specific instance in your life of something you want to accomplish, and you're tying them together temporally and spatially, with the idea being that when you manifest one of those possibilities, it pulls all the other possibilities into time and space at the same time or in close proximity. That to me would be an example of space-time magic at work. It's using the momentum of the universe in your favor, because basically you take this thing and you put all this effort into creating these sigils, and you fire them, and you have them all tied together. And then what ends up happening is when one manifests, it pulls all the other ones right into reality with you. And, I've used it for some great and dramatic effects in my life. So, well worth it. On the other hand, another example of how this would work would be a meditation where you are going and connecting with the web of space and time, and connecting with the timelines that are in that web. And you're picking out of them the best possible timeline, but you're also manipulating it, and maybe you're taking segments of other timelines and fitting it together until you have a unique timeline that allows you to manifest your desired result by aligning the space and time of what's needed to manifest that. And what I mean by that is, like, if you look at a given event, it is defined by the space and time that occurs, to make it happen. My approach to space and time magic in some ways is informed by the notion that space is essentially nouns, looking at it from a written verbal structure. Like, this space right now is a noun. Okay. It's an event happening right now. And then the action coming into that space and possibly changing it is your time, right? It's a verb. It's coming in and it's affecting that event. So that's one way. Another way that I take this is working with concept of identity, where, like, if you look at your identity is a fixture in space and time. It's a way that you are grounding yourself in space and time. But let's say you want to get to another identity. Well, then what you're doing is you're changing the space and the time that you're in. And so what you can do is you can actually create a working where you connect to that future self, and you use, you connect to that future space, and then you use time as a way to get there. And maybe you rearrange the sequence in order to do whatever it is you need to do, so that suddenly you're in that other space and time. And what you're changing at the same time is your identity, your sense of self. Because let's be honest here, if we're working effective magic, we are changing who we are within ourselves as well as the world around us. It's not just changing the world around us, we are changing ourselves as well in order to align with the new reality that we're creating. So those are some examples in my mind of how space-time magic works, certainly how I've worked with space-time magic. And I'm not, and that's not even getting into, like, the aspects of working with spirits, which we can also certainly do. I've done some work with, when I talk about the web of time, I've done some work with what I would consider to be the spider goddess of time, who I call Tempora. And an interesting aside, Tempora is in temporal, but also, like, in terms of music and vibration and things along those lines, right? So, I work with her, but I also work with the goetic demon of Prasan, who helps me with the vibrations of time and manipulating the timelines. And I work with Thede, who is a pop culture deity out of Wraithu, who manipulates space. And then I have Elephant, who's kind of the guardian of the web, and he kind of makes sure that things don't go too topsy-turvy. He's a protector of the person on the path. He knows when to put the right obstructions into place and also when to remove them. And so that's an example of working with spirits. And there's other stuff out there, but that's kind of like my model anyway. That I've developed up to a certain point and plan on developing a lot further in the relatively near future. And that's not even including some work I've done with, like, the archangels Metatron, Sandalphon, and Savuvial. Where Sandalphon, the archangel of the underworld, very much connects with memory, whereas Metatron is the archangel of creativity and imagination, and therefore the future, although really they're one and the same, because memory and imagination go hand in hand. And then you have Savuvial, who ties it all together. He's the archangel of the present. He's never in one place long enough to be, like, really there, but he's all over the place, bringing everything together and tying it all together with his cord. So those are examples of how you could work with spirits. Now, I had a couple questions in the Magical Experiments group, so I'm going to talk about those. One member wrote, I'm always motivated to do magic when there's a possibility I can learn how to make some money, because it's one of the most practical applications for magic and also challenging. Fair enough. And we're actually going to be doing a video on wealth magic next week, so this will kind of, you might be interested in that one too. She asked, of these two scenarios, which would most align with space-time magic? Buying a winning scratcher style lottery ticket because of being at the right location at the right time, playing the markets, buying and selling at the right time, and also being in a time and place where you can play. It's kind of an interesting question, and so my response to that really is, they're both examples of space-time magic. The one thing I think the person ignores is that, like in regards to the first situation, you're dealing with a scenario of chance, right? Because you are literally playing against everybody else who is playing that lottery ticket, playing for that lottery. So you are trying to basically manipulate the variables, and you're going up against a steep hill. And how do I know this? Because I played the lottery on occasion just for the heck of it, and I've tried stuff and it's never worked. And the reason why, in my experience, is quite frankly because you're dealing with such a sharp upscale of chance. You're working against all these variables that you simply cannot account for or easily control. I find with space-time magic, it's about KISS, keep it simple, stupid, right? It's the same thing, with any kind of magical act. The simpler you keep it, the more effective it is, in my opinion. The more involved and stuff like that it gets. Not that there isn't some value in the window dressings and everything else, but the more complicated you make something, the more variables come into play. And with something like a lottery scratcher type situation, that's exactly what you're dealing with. You're dealing with complicated magic, because you're dealing with complicated variables that you're trying to control, and it's a long odds to beat. Could it happen? It could, but if there are people who've applied magic to win the lottery, they're not talking. So, I think you can kind of do the math from there. They either don't want to share it, or it hasn't worked, and there you go. And then the other thing in terms of playing, using space-time magic in terms of playing the market, I'm assuming she's talking about investing in stocks and stuff. Again, yes, that can work really well in terms of finding the right space and time to take advantage of things. But what I'm going to say to that as well is that you have to do a lot of market research. And I know that, again, because right now I'm doing a ton of research in investments in stocks, which I'm going to talk about more in next week's video on wealth magic. But because this is space-time magic and she asked, I'm going to go into it anyway a little bit. You have to do a ton of research. You have to learn the market and how it works. And to do that, I'm giving myself a good year to learn this stuff, because it's important to learn. So could you use space-time magic? Yes, you could, but you don't want to do it as just random chance guesswork. You want to do it with a calculated strategic approach. What I'm going to do with something like space-time magic is I'm going to set up space-time magic where it's going to ping my intuition about a particular company that I'm following already, and it's going to give me a sense of, okay, this is the time where you contact your broker, or you get onto Ameritrade and you invest in your stocks. You invest your money into the stock because it's going to blow up. Or this is the time when you move stuff away because, well, things aren't going so well. And I would add on top of that, there's some other variables to consider, like working with the company spirit. And of course, there's just the practical aspect of, you need to follow the stuff that you've invested in. You don't just invest and then never pay attention to it. That's really important. So hopefully that answers that question. But as you can see with space-time magic, there are variables there that you really have to consider. This isn't just something you're doing at random. You really want to think it through. Next thing is, another person said, during those times when I go back and read old journals, journaling being something I've really fallen behind on these days, that's a bummer. I sometimes read an entry saying, to the future me, reading this, I am in need of healing energy. Please project some back to me at this moment in time. So I do that while remembering the boost I received at that particular moment. And I would say that's a good example of kind of retroactive magic at work, because you're essentially telling your future you, I need this. And then your future you is actually sending that back and helping you at that moment of time. I've done that before. I have written notes to my future self. I've also written notes to my future self about, things that I want that future self to work on, at that moment in time when it comes, because I've kind of been like, okay, I see down the line that this is going to happen this way and this is what I want to do. So I think that, you can certainly do something along those lines as well. I think that what I find fascinating about writing, and I'm actually getting ready to start writing a book on the magic of writing, which is really exploring the practical magic aspects of writing and how to use writing in your magical work. What I find fascinating about writing is that writing allows you to slip into altered states of awareness around space-time magic and glimpse events that could be, and also manipulate through words those particular variables. And I have written about that in the books, but I'm going to go into it in a lot more depth in my next magical book. So that's some interesting thoughts to consider there with space-time magic. Um, if you want to apply space-time magic to your life, the key thing you really need to do is wrap your head around what space is and what time is to you and your understanding of it, and be open to the possibilities. A lot of times what I see people focus on is really, like, again, retroactive magic, which, hey, I get it. It's kind of seductive, the idea of I can change my past in order to, so that my loved one didn't die or whatever else. But as I've shared elsewhere, that doesn't really work that way. But look at how you could apply it to your life now or towards your future. What could you do to set your life up a certain way? I've put a lot of work into setting my life up a very specific way, and to having things come into fruition in my life in a certain way. And I can tell you that that has been a much more productive use of space-time magic, because it's really allowed me to design my life and to create a life that I'm continually just thoroughly happy with, because things are just continuing to go my way overall. It doesn't mean I don't have occasional issues or whatever, but if I look at my life compared to, like, even like 5 years ago or 10 years ago or what have you, my life now is a lot simpler and a lot more focused, and I'm doing the stuff that's really important to me, and I'm, getting things lined up in my life continuously that support what I'm doing, so that I can focus on it and really focus on living my life. So I think that that's like an ideal approach to using space-time magic. I know it doesn't sound very sexy, but let me tell you, when you're able to live life on your terms in the way that you want to, and you have things going your way pretty much most of the time, if not, all the time, that's when, you're living a magical life. So take that with a grain of salt and do whatever you want with it. Anyway, that's it for this week's video. Next week we are going to be talking about wealth magic, so we'll have some fun with that. And until then, stay frosty in this hot summer weather, unless of course you're in the southern hemisphere, and then stay warm in the cold weather. Yeah, anyway, take care.